Tony Russo had always known that doctors didn't bring good news. He dreaded those sterile white rooms, the smell of disinfectant, and the judgmental clink of a stethoscope against a clipboard. But the worst part? The advice. The endless soul-crushing advice. And today, as he shuffled into Dr. N. Bernstein's office, Tony had a sinking feeling that this would be no different. "Mr. Russo?" the nurse called with a smile that was far too cheerful for a place that smelled like rubbing alcohol. Yeah, I'm here." Tony sighed, forcing himself up from the waiting room chair. He gave a small grunt, adjusting his belt. The pasta dinner from last night was still sitting heavy. Not that he regretted it. After all, if Sunday dinner didn't leave you feeling like a stuffed sausage, were you even Italian? "Right this way," the nurse chirped, leading him down the sterile hallway. The fluorescent lights buzzed softly overhead. Tony could already feel the bad news creeping around the corner. Inside the exam room, Tony perched on the edge of the crinkly paper-covered table. He hated that paper. Made him feel like a piece of meat at the butcher's shop. There were posters on the wall. Understanding your blood sugar levels, healthy alternatives to carbs, and worst of all, a big chart labeled, "What diabetes can do to you." "Wonderful," Tony muttered, eyeing the images of toes that clearly didn't survive the battle. Then the door swung open. Dr. Bernstein entered, dressed in his usual white coat, the epitome of authority. He had that doctor's look, half concerned, half exasperated, like he'd seen too many people like Tony and knew exactly how this conversation would go. "Tony," the doctor greeted with a nod. "Doc," Tony grunted back, "what's the verdict? Am I going to live to see the next Yankees game or what?" Dr. Bernstein forced a small chuckle, but Tony knew that look. The doctor had something unpleasant to say. "Tony," he began, "I got your blood work back, and frankly, I'm concerned." Tony tried to play it cool, though his palms were already sweating. "Ah, come on. Concerned? Isn't that what you doctors always say? I feel fine. A little tired, maybe. But hey, who doesn't after a good plate of spaghetti, huh?" The doctor didn't laugh. Instead, he flipped through the chart like it held the secrets of the universe. "Your sugar levels are dangerously high, Tony. We're not just talking about a little spike here. We're talking about a serious risk to your health." Tony shifted in his seat, the paper crinkling beneath him. All right, so what are we talking? A couple less cannoli? Maybe I skip dessert every other Sunday?" Dr. Bernstein shook his head. "Tony, you need to make significant changes. No more sweets, no more pasta, no more bread, and definitely no more wine." Tony blinked. The words didn't register at first. Surely the doctor didn't say what he thought he just said. "Wait," Tony said, holding up his hands like he was calming down in a bar fight. "You're telling me no more pasta, no more bread, no more sweets, and no more wine? Doc, are you out of your mind?" The doctor tried to reason. "Tony, I know this is tough, but nothing!" Tony shot back, eyes wide with disbelief. "No pasta? No bread? I'm Italian, Doc. You understand what that means? Pasta runs in my veins. Bread? Bread is it's like a gift from the heavens. A fresh loaf of Italian bread, still warm, dipped in olive oil with a little sprinkle of salt. That's not food. That's life." Dr. Bernstein sighed. "Tony, and sweets?" Tony barreled on, waving his hands dramatically. "I love sweets. That's why I give myself insulin. It's the perfect system. I eat what I want, and then boom, a little shot and I'm good as new. That's called balance, Doc. You're messing with the balance." "And the wine! You gotta be kidding me with the wine!" Tony's voice cracked. "A glass of red with dinner? That's like church for Italians. How am I supposed to make it through a meal without it? And more importantly, how am I gonna survive my wife without it? You ever been married for 45 years, Doc? Huh? Trust me, you'd need a glass too." Dr. Bernstein rubbed his temples. "Tony, this isn't a joke. I'm trying to save your life." "Oh yeah? You know who else lived a long life? My grandfather." Tony jabbed a finger in the air triumphantly. "That man ate pasta every day of his life, dunked his biscotti and his espresso every morning, and every night he had a big glass of wine. When he died, he was 105. "That's not typical," the doctor replied dryly. "Well, maybe it should be." Tony threw up his hands. "I bet his doctor tried to pull this stunt too. Told him to cut back on the wine. You know what Grandpa said? Mind your business." And you know what? That doctor's probably 6 feet under now, and Grandpa was still out there, living it up. Dr. Bernstein opened his mouth, but Tony wasn't done. "I said stop. I can't take no more. You tell me one more time what I can't eat, I'm gonna pass out on the floor." He clutched his chest for dramatic effect, though the only thing in pain was his pride. "Tony?" the doctor attempted, his voice firm. "And another thing." Tony barreled on, undeterred. "If I can't eat pasta, bread, sweets, or wine, what's left? Lettuce? Kale? What am I, a rabbit? I'm not living like that, Doc. You can keep your quinoa and your kale smoothies. I'll take my penne alla vodka, thank you very much." "Tony, moderation." "Moderation? What does that even mean? 1 piece of garlic bread instead of 4. A splash of wine instead of a glass? No thanks. If I'm going down happy." The doctor stared at him, clearly exhausted. "Tony, I'm not trying to ruin your life. I'm trying to extend it." Tony paused. That one stung. He knew the doctor meant well. "Maybe." "All right," Tony grumbled, shifting in his seat. "But just so we're clear, if I cut back a little, I'm not giving up Sunday dinner. Not happening." "Fine," Dr. Bernstein said reluctantly. "Start slow, and maybe, just maybe, ease up on the wine." "We'll see," Tony muttered under his breath. And as he walked out of that doctor's office, Tony made a mental note. Half a plate of pasta wasn't really giving up pasta. And a small glass of wine, well, small was subjective. Because if there was one thing Tony Russo knew, it was that life without pasta, bread, sweets, and wine wasn't really living. And Tony? Tony was a man who lived. The next morning, Tony woke up with the weight of the doctor's words still swirling in his mind. No pasta, no bread, no sweets, no wine. It sounded like some medieval torture. He dragged himself out of bed, his knees cracking like the sound of an old door hinge. "Tony!" his wife Maria called from the kitchen. The smell of fresh espresso wafted through the air, mingling with the irresistible scent of something warm and buttery. He shuffled in, rubbing the sleep from his eyes. "Morning," he mumbled. Maria stood by the stove, her hair still in curlers, flipping what could only be described as heaven on a skillet. "I made your favorite," she chirped. "French toast with a little powdered sugar, and I used the good bread." Tony's mouth watered. The semolina loaf from Sal's? The one and only. He sat down, momentarily forgetting all about Dr. Bernstein's words. The golden brown slices of French toast glistened, butter pooling at the edges, the powdered sugar dancing like snowflakes. But just as he reached for his fork, guilt hit him like a ton of bricks. "Maria," he sighed, pushing the plate away. "The doc says I can't eat stuff like this no more." Maria frowned. "What's he mean by that? French toast is practically a vegetable if you think about it. Bread, eggs, milk. That's a balanced meal." "Not according to Bernstein. No more sweets, no more bread, no more nothing." Tony slumped in his chair, dramatically draping his arm over his face. "I'm a dead man walking, Maria." "Tony?" she scoffed, hands on her hips. "Your grandfather ate like this every day and he made it to 105. You think a couple of slices of French toast are going to take you out?" "That's what I said," Tony exclaimed, his frustration renewed. "The doc thinks I'm going to keel over any second." Meanwhile, Grandpa Vincenzo was sipping wine at breakfast and smoking cigars after dinner. Maria nodded thoughtfully. "And he still managed to chase the neighbor's dog off the porch every morning." "Exactly." But the guilt lingered. Maybe the doctor had a point. He didn't feel like a spring chicken anymore. His back ached when he bent down to tie his shoes. His knees sounded like a percussion section every time he got up. And yeah, the occasional dizzy spell wasn't exactly comforting. "All right," Tony said, defeated. "Maybe I'll try, a little. But I ain't giving up everything." Maria grinned, pouring him a cup of espresso. "That's my Tony. Besides, a happy heart's a healthy heart. That afternoon, Tony decided to pay a visit to his best friend, Sal, who ran the corner deli. Sal was a legend in the neighborhood, known for his oversized sandwiches and the fact that he could argue passionately about marinara sauce for hours. The little brass bell above the door jingled as Tony walked in. Sal, a thick man with a permanent 5 o'clock shadow, greeted him from behind the counter. "Tony!" Sal boomed, spreading his arms wide. "Look who decided to grace me with his presence." "Hey, Sal," Tony said, though his smile was half-hearted. "What's the matter with you? You look like someone stole your last meatball." Tony sighed. "Doc says I got a cut. Back. No more pasta, no more bread, no more sweets, and, get this, no more wine." Sal froze, the meat slicer humming beside him. "No wine?" He shook his head in disbelief. "What is this world coming to?" "That's what I said," Tony exclaimed. "But what am I supposed to eat, huh? Lettuce, carrot sticks, like a rabbit?" Sal gave him a sympathetic nod. "That doc of yours doesn't understand what it means to be Italian. Food isn't just food, it's family, it's tradition. You can't cut out pasta. That's like trying to live without air." Tony slapped the counter in agreement. "You get it." "But," Sal added, narrowing his eyes, "maybe you could try a little balance. Eat the pasta, but maybe not a whole pot. Have a glass of wine, not half the bottle." Tony scowled. "You're starting to sound like Bernstein." "I'm just saying," Sal chuckled. "But listen, I'll make you a sandwich. Something light, like turkey on whole grain. It's not the end of the world." Tony groaned but relented. "Fine. But if I see one piece of kale on that sandwich, I'm walking out." Later that night, Tony sat at the kitchen table staring down at his dinner. Grilled chicken breast, some broccoli, and a small side of quinoa. Whatever the hell that was. Maria smiled encouragingly. "See? Healthy and delicious." Tony poked the quinoa with his fork like it might bite back. "This looks like something you'd feed a parrot." "Just try it." He reluctantly took a bite. It wasn't terrible, but it wasn't pasta either. He chewed dramatically, making sure Maria saw his suffering. "I'm wasting away already," he declared, clutching his stomach. "Oh, stop it," Maria said, rolling her eyes. "You'll thank me when you're still around at 105. Tony grumbled under his breath but couldn't help cracking a small smile. He'd try, for Maria, for his family. But as he sipped on a glass of sparkling water, he made a silent vow. Sunday dinner? Sunday dinner would never change. A few days passed, and Tony did his best to stick to the doctor's orders. He swapped out his morning pastries for oatmeal, drank black coffee without sugar, and even ate those birdseed-looking crackers Maria bought from the health store. He endured it all, the bland meals, the lack of pasta, the absence of his beloved desserts. But by Friday night, he was reaching his limit. Maria had gone out to her book club, leaving Tony alone with the fridge. The house was quiet except for the hum of the kitchen light. He opened the fridge door and stared longingly at the forbidden treasures within, the leftover lasagna, thick with layers of ricotta and meat sauce. The garlic bread wrapped in foil, probably still warm if he threw it in the oven. And then, there it was, Maria's famous tiramisu. A dessert so decadent it could make a grown man weep. Tony stood there, the cold air wafting over him as he battled his conscience. "Just one bite," he muttered. "One little bite ain't gonna kill me." He sliced off the tiniest piece of tiramisu, savoring the creamy mascarpone and the espresso-soaked ladyfingers. Pure bliss. Then, before he could stop himself, he grabbed a second bite, then a third. Before he knew it, half the tray was gone. The guilt hit him instantly. He wiped his mouth like a criminal covering his tracks. But the evidence was clear. Crumbs on the counter, the telltale smear of cocoa powder on his chin. "Maria's gonna kill me," he whispered. But Maria never found out. Not that night. At least, the next morning, Tony went for his usual walk to the corner store. He'd started taking these walks ever since the doctor recommended a little exercise. It wasn't much, but Tony figured if he was going to suffer through a pastaless life, he might as well stretch his legs a little. As he ambled down the street, old Mr. Rossi waved from his stoop. "Morning, Tony," Rossi called, his usual cigar clamped between his teeth. "How's the health kick?" "Hey," Tony shrugged. "Still breathing, so I guess that's something." "Good, good. Just remember, a little vino never hurt nobody." "Tell that to my doc," Tony grumbled. He made his way to Sal's deli, the brass bell jingling as he stepped inside. "Tony." Sal boomed like he hadn't just seen him 2 days ago. "You're looking good. A little pale maybe, but good." "I feel like a shadow of my former self, Sal," Tony replied, clutching his chest dramatically. "No pasta, no bread, I'm withering away." Sal chuckled. "Well, maybe I got something to cheer you up. I just gotten some fresh mozzarella and prosciutto. Just a taste. The doc doesn't have to know." Tony's mouth watered. "Just a taste," he repeated, like a man convincing himself he wasn't about to sin. But just as Sal began slicing the mozzarella, the door burst open. It was Maria. Her eyes narrowed as she spotted Tony at the counter. "Tony!" she snapped. "What are you doing?" Tony froze, his hand inches from the prosciutto. "Maria, what a surprise." "Surprise? I thought you were taking your health walk." "I am. This is the scenic route." Maria crossed her arms. "And the scenic route ends with you face first in a sandwich, huh?" Sal quickly cleared his throat. "I was just offering him a little sample. Doctor's orders, calcium's good for the bones." Maria wasn't buying it. "Let's go, Tony. We're getting you some kale." "Kale?" Tony's face twisted in horror. "I thought we talked about that." But Maria was already dragging him out the door. That evening, after Tony managed to choke down a quinoa salad with grilled chicken, he sat sulking in his recliner. He flipped through the channels aimlessly, every commercial taunting him with images of steaming pasta and dripping cheeseburgers. "Maria," he groaned, "I can't live like this." Maria, reading her book on the couch, didn't even look up. "You'll live. And you'll thank me when you're still kicking at 105, just like your grandfather." "Grandpa Vincenzo had a bottle of red wine with every meal and dipped bread in olive oil like it was water," Tony countered. "And he was the happiest man I ever knew." Maria smirked. "And you'll be the second happiest once you get used to it." Tony grumbled, but deep down he knew she meant well, and truth be told, he was starting to feel a little better. His pants weren't quite as tight, he had a little more energy, and while he hated to admit it, the kale chips weren't completely terrible. But Sunday was coming, and Sunday was sacred. The next day, as the church bells rang through the neighborhood, Tony made his way to his sister Rosa's house for Sunday dinner. The whole family was there, cousins, nieces, nephews, all packed into the little dining room like sardines. The table was a masterpiece. Platters of lasagna, meatballs the size of baseballs, garlic bread glistening with butter. And at the center of it all was a carafe of homemade wine, dark and rich. Maria shot Tony a warning glance, but he raised his hands in surrender. "Just a small plate," he promised. "A little pasta, a little wine, for tradition." She sighed, relenting. "Fine, but no seconds. Deal." Tony took his seat, twirling his fork into the pasta like a maestro. The first bite was like a homecoming. The sauce, the cheese, it was like his soul had been revived. And when he washed it down with a sip of wine, he could swear he heard Grandpa Vincenzo laughing from above. "To life," Tony declared, raising his glass. "And to a little pasta on Sundays." Everyone cheered, and for that moment Tony knew he had found the perfect balance. As the laughter echoed through the house, Tony leaned back in his chair, savoring the warmth of family and the joy of a full belly. The pasta was gone, the wine bottle nearly empty, and the air was thick with the smell of espresso brewing in the kitchen. Rosa, ever the gracious host, brought out a tray of cannoli. "Tony," she said, smiling slyly, "one little cannoli won't hurt. It's Sunday." Tony's eyes gleamed. "You're speaking my language, Rosa." But before he could reach for one, Maria's voice rang out. "Tony!" He froze. Remember what the doctor said. Tony sighed dramatically, clutching his chest like he'd been mortally wounded. Maria, for the love of God, it's a cannoli! It's not like I'm inhaling a whole cake. The family erupted in laughter. Even Maria had to bite back a smile. Fine, she relented. One cannoli. But that's it. Tony held the little pastry like it was a precious jewel, taking a delicate bite. The creamy ricotta and the crispy shell were pure bliss. You know, he said, savoring every crumb. If I go out, at least I'll go out happy. Stop talking like that, Maria scolded, though her smile betrayed her affection. You're not going anywhere. Tony winked. Not without another cannoli, anyway. Later that evening, back at home, Tony sat on the porch enjoying the cool breeze. Maria joined him, holding 2 glasses of sparkling water. Not quite wine, Tony said with a smirk. Think of it as practice, Maria replied. They sat in silence for a while, watching the neighborhood wind down. Kids rode their bikes past the house, and old Mr. Rossi waved from across the street, his cigar glowing in the dark. You know, Tony said, breaking the silence, I get why you're on me about the food. You want me to stick around, and I want that too. Maria smiled softly. I just want you healthy, Tony. I don't want to lose you. He reached over and squeezed her hand. I get it, and I'll try, I promise. But I'm telling you right now, Sunday pasta stays. Maria chuckled. Fine, Sunday pasta stays, but maybe we switch out the garlic bread for a salad once in a while. Tony grimaced. You're pushing it, Maria. But deep down, he knew it was all worth it. Because for all the pasta, the sweets, and the wine, nothing tasted as good as knowing the people you loved were looking out for you. And maybe, just maybe, a little kale wouldn't kill him, though he sure as hell wasn't telling the doctor that. A few weeks passed, and Tony found himself adjusting, well, somewhat. The mornings were still rough without his sugary pastries, and he cursed every leafy green that found its way onto his plate. But he had to admit, he was feeling better. His pants were a little looser, and the daily walks didn't leave him gasping for air like they used to. But Tony was no saint. Every now and then, when Maria wasn't looking, he'd sneak a cookie from the stash he kept behind the coffee mugs. It was a delicate operation, perfected over years of marriage. He called it the sweet escape. One evening, after an especially painful dinner of grilled fish and steamed broccoli, Tony's cravings hit like a freight train. Maria was in the back room, FaceTiming with her sister, which meant he had a solid 20-minute window. He crept to the kitchen, his slippers barely making a sound on the tile. Reaching up to the top shelf, he carefully slid the coffee mugs aside. There in the shadows was his treasure, a sleeve of chocolate chip cookies. Hello, old friends, he whispered. Just as he twisted open the plastic, the front door creaked. Tony. He spun around, clutching the cookies like a squirrel caught mid-heist. But it wasn't Maria, it was his cousin Frankie, bursting through the door with his usual chaotic energy. Hey, Tony, Frankie grinned, barely noticing the cookies. I got news! Tony quickly shoved the cookies back into their hiding spot. You ever hear of knocking, Frankie? Ah, come on, we're family. Besides, this is big. Tony raised an eyebrow. Bigger than you interrupting my snack time? Way bigger. Frankie slapped a flyer down on the kitchen table. Bocce tournament, this Saturday. And guess who's forming a team? Tony's face lit up. Bocce ball had been a family pastime for decades. The neighborhood park held annual tournaments, and the bragging rights were worth more than gold. Frankie, Tony grinned, you're looking at the reigning bocce champ of '92. That's what I'm talking about, Frankie cheered. But you better be ready. Those guys from the other side of town are playing. They're ruthless. I'm always ready, Tony said, puffing out his chest. But I gotta check with Maria, with the new lifestyle and all. Frankie smirked. You mean the no-fun lifestyle? Exactly. Later that night, Tony approached Maria cautiously, the way a man does when he's about to ask for something he knows might get him in trouble. She was folding laundry in the living room, humming to herself. Maria, sweetheart, Tony began, using his most charming tone. "You know how much I've been sticking to this whole diet thing, right?" Maria eyed him suspiciously. "What do you want, Tony?" "Nothing crazy," he insisted. "Just, Frankie's putting together a bocce team for the tournament on Saturday. I figured, a little fresh air, some exercise, doctor would approve." Maria pursed her lips. "And what about the snacks and drinks at the park? Those sausage sandwiches, the cannoli, the endless bottles of wine?" Tony placed a hand over his heart. "I swear I'll be good. Water and maybe a turkey sandwich. No wine. Just bocce and good company." Maria shook her head, but she was smiling. "Fine, but I'm coming to keep an eye on you." Tony beamed. "Maria, I wouldn't have it any other way." Saturday arrived and the park buzzed with excitement. The smell of grilled sausages and peppers wafted through the air, mingling with the cheers and laughter of old friends. Frankie and Tony lined up with their team, facing off against their rivals, the infamous DiNapoli brothers. The competition was fierce, the bocce balls gliding across the gravel like seasoned dancers. Tony's blood pumped with every perfect roll, but temptation lurked everywhere. "Hey, Tony," a vendor called. "Fresh cannoli, best in the city." Tony's eyes darted longingly toward the golden pastries, but Maria's voice rang in his head like a warning bell. "Stay strong," he muttered to himself. By the final round, the score was tied. The crowd gathered close, the tension thick. Tony crouched low, the final bocce ball cradled in his hand. He could feel the weight of it, the cool surface smooth against his palm. "Come on, Tony," Frankie hollered. "This is it." Tony took a deep breath, blocking out the distractions, the laughter, the smell of the sausages, the whispered offers of cold wine. He rolled the ball with perfect precision. It kissed the ground, curving gracefully before stopping just inches from the target. The crowd erupted. "Tony!" Frankie lifted him in the air. "You did it." Maria, despite her best efforts to stay composed, grinned from ear to ear. Later, as they sat on the park bench, Tony sipped from a bottle of water, the satisfaction of victory washing over him. "You know," he said, glancing at Maria, "maybe this healthy stuff isn't so bad." Maria chuckled. "You see? A little balance goes a long way." "But," Tony added with a wink, "next Sunday, we're having pasta." Maria laughed. "One plate, Tony." "One plate." "And a little wine," he added. "Fine," she said, rolling her eyes. "A little wine." As the sun dipped below the horizon, Tony leaned back, savoring the moment. Life was sweet, and maybe, just maybe, it didn't always need dessert, though he still had those cookies stashed behind the coffee mugs. As the weeks went by, Tony found himself settling into a new routine. He walked more, ate a bit better, and even made a genuine effort to cut down on his beloved sweets. But, as with any change, there were moments of weakness, like when he'd find himself in the kitchen at night, staring longingly at the half-empty jar of biscotti Maria had made for their anniversary. He'd fight the urge, reminding himself of how good he felt after a walk, how his energy levels were higher, and how Maria had started to give him that proud smile she reserved for rare occasions. But the temptation was always there, lurking in the background, especially on Sundays. Every Sunday after church, the family would gather around the table, pasta and sauce steaming, garlic bread fresh from the oven. The air would be thick with chatter, laughter, and the clink of glasses. And while Tony was sticking to his one-plate policy, he couldn't help but feel the weight of the tradition. The rich sauces, the homemade bread, the wine that flowed freely, it all tugged at his heartstrings. One afternoon, after a particularly long day at work, Tony sat in the kitchen, looking at a slice of melon on his plate. He tried to enjoy it, he really did, but it just wasn't the same. His mind wandered back to the lasagna his mother used to make, the thick layers of cheese and meat that melted in your mouth. Just as he was about to sigh, Maria walked in, holding a bag of groceries. "Hey, you okay?" she asked, setting the bags on the counter. Tony didn't answer right away. He poked at the melon, then looked up at Maria. I miss the old days, Maria. The food. It was so much more than just eating. It was about family, about connection. Maria set the bag down and walked over to him, cupping his face gently. Tony, I get it. I know how much you miss it, but we're still family. We're still together. We don't need all that to stay close. I know, Tony muttered. It's just, I feel like I'm missing something, you know? Maria smiled softly, her eyes full of understanding. I get it, but you're here with me. We're making new memories, even if they don't involve sausage sandwiches or wine at every meal. Tony grinned, a little embarrassed. You know you're right. You always are. She kissed his cheek. And I always will be. That weekend, Tony got a surprise. His cousin Frankie, who had never been one to shy away from good food, called him up with exciting news. Tony, you won't believe it. We're doing a family potluck at the park next weekend. Everyone's bringing their best dish. No restrictions, just family favorites. Tony raised an eyebrow. What's the catch, Frankie? No catch, Frankie laughed. Just bring what you love. You make your best pasta and I'll bring my famous meatballs. It'll be just like old times. Tony hesitated for a moment, the idea of pasta again making his stomach rumble. But he also thought about the little victories, the walks, the better habits, the improved health. He didn't want to undo all the progress he'd made, and he didn't want Maria to see him backsliding. Maybe I'll just bring something light, Tony said. How about a salad? Keep it simple. Frankie scoffed. Tony, you're killing me. No pasta, no wine? What's next, a tofu burger? Don't tempt me, Tony joked. But as the day of the potluck drew near, Tony started to think more about it. The pasta, the wine, the family, maybe, just maybe, he could find a balance. He didn't have to give up everything, but he could make smarter choices. The day of the potluck, the park was alive with the scent of barbecue, the sound of children laughing, and the sight of old friends catching up. Tony walked over to Frankie's table, his arms full of a big bowl of fresh salad, the green leaves almost glowing in the sun. Look who finally decided to show up, Frankie said with a grin, eyeing the salad. I thought you were going to make me eat all this myself, Tony laughed. I can't let you steal the show completely, Frankie. Gotta keep it healthy. Maria joined them, holding a basket of freshly baked bread, but she immediately pulled Tony aside. What's going on? She whispered, giving him a quick once-over. Why aren't you eating? Tony glanced at the spread of food, his eyes lingering on the lasagna, the sausage sandwiches, and yes, the wine. But then he thought about the salad he'd prepared, about how proud he felt that it was a choice that showed he was trying. I'm pacing myself, he said quietly. I want to enjoy today, but I also want to keep moving forward. Maria looked at him, her expression softening. I'm proud of you, Tony. He smiled at her, feeling the warmth of her support. You've always had my back. As the afternoon wore on, Tony did exactly what he promised. He enjoyed the day, shared stories with family, and even took part in a bocce game, though he didn't go all out like he used to. He knew his limits, but he also knew that balance didn't mean deprivation. It meant making the most of every moment and savoring life in ways that didn't require a plate piled high with pasta. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in hues of pink and gold, Tony sat back and raised his glass of sparkling water. Here's to the future, he said, his voice rich with emotion. Here's to good food, good company, and even better health. Maria clinked her glass against his, a warm smile on her face. Here's to us, Tony. And for the first time in a long while, Tony didn't feel the pang of longing for all the things he'd given up. He didn't need them. What he had now, health, family, balance, was enough. The weeks after the potluck were surprisingly good for Tony. He found a rhythm, a little pasta on special occasions, a small glass of wine on Sundays, and plenty of salads and lean proteins in between. Even Maria started experimenting with healthier recipes, whipping up dishes that made Tony forget he was watching his sugar. But old habits die hard. One evening, Tony was relaxing in his recliner half watching a baseball game when the craving hit. It wasn't just a passing thought. No, this was deep. A thick slice of tiramisu, the layers of coffee-soaked ladyfingers and mascarpone calling his name like a siren song. Maria, Tony called toward the kitchen, trying to sound casual. You didn't happen to make any dessert, did you? Maria peeked around the corner, wooden spoon in hand. There's fruit in the fridge, Tony. He made a face. Fruit? You mean that watermelon that's been sitting there for days? It's fresh, she insisted. Yeah, fresh like my patience, Tony mumbled. But she didn't hear. He sat back, arms crossed, as visions of tiramisu tormented him. Finally, he couldn't stand it. He slipped on his shoes, grabbed his keys, and headed out. The local bakery was like a shrine to temptation. The moment Tony stepped inside, the scent of sugar and butter wrapped around him like an old friend. Behind the glass, cakes, cannolis, and eclairs glistened under the lights. But it was the tiramisu that stopped him in his tracks. Hey, Tony, called Sal, the owner, from behind the counter. Haven't seen you in a while, thought you forgot about us. Forget? No chance, Sal, Tony said, eyeing the dessert like it was a long-lost lover. Just been trying to behave. Sal laughed, patting his belly. Ah, the old doctor's orders speech. You know, my uncle gave that up after a week. Yeah? How's he doing? Well, he's 82, still eats like a king, but he also walks 5 miles a day. Balance, Tony. Balance. Tony smiled. Balance? Right. But before he could think twice, he pointed at the tiramisu. Just one slice, Sal. Make it small. Sal nodded, but Tony swore that small was a matter of opinion. The slice he handed over was no innocent sliver, it was a commitment. Tony took a deep breath, paid, and left the bakery with the sinful dessert clutched tightly. Back at home, Tony sat at the table, the tiramisu gleaming in front of him. He picked up the fork, took a bite, and closed his eyes. The coffee-soaked ladyfingers, the rich mascarpone, it was like a symphony of rebellion. But halfway through the slice, something strange happened. The satisfaction wasn't quite as powerful as he'd imagined. He thought about how far he'd come, how much better he'd been feeling. The way Maria had smiled when he said no to seconds last Sunday. He put the fork down. Maria walked in just as he pushed the plate away. Tony? Her eyes widened at the sight of the half-eaten dessert. I thought I wanted it, he said, a little sheepishly. But I didn't need it, not like before. Maria smiled softly, walking over and resting a hand on his shoulder. That's progress, Tony. Real progress. He nodded. Yeah, I guess it is. Then, with a grin, he added, but next time, maybe we can make one of those sugar-free cakes you keep talking about, for balance. Maria laughed, kissed his cheek, and said, You got it, Tony. One cake, for balance. And for the first time, Tony believed it. Balance wasn't just some impossible idea. It was something he could reach, one step and one bite at a time. The next morning, Tony woke up feeling good. No guilt, no regrets. Just a lightness that he hadn't felt in a long time. Even Maria noticed the change. You're smiling, Tony, she said as she poured him a cup of coffee. You dreaming about something good? Hey, Tony shrugged with a grin. Maybe I dreamed I owned that bakery. Unlimited tiramisu. No consequences. Maria laughed, shaking her head. Keep dreaming. But that lightheartedness stuck with Tony. As the days passed, he started making small adjustments without feeling like he was punishing himself. Instead of skipping pasta entirely, he had smaller portions. Instead of a glass of wine every night, he saved it for weekends. And the walks? Well, those became his favorite part of the day. He and Maria would stroll through the neighborhood, hand in hand, gossiping about the neighbors and reminiscing about their younger days. The more they walked, the further Tony wanted to go. One day he even suggested heading to the park trail. You sure you're up for that? Maria teased. Up for it? Tony grinned. By the time I'm done, I'll be racing the squirrels. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. Temptation had a way of creeping in, especially when Tony's old buddies invited him out for dinner. "Tony!" "Come on, man," Frankie called over the phone one Friday evening. "The guys are meeting at Carlo's. You can't say no to Carlo's lasagna." Tony hesitated. Carlo's was practically a temple of cheese and carbs, but at the same time he didn't want to isolate himself. His new lifestyle wasn't supposed to mean cutting out the people he loved. "How about this?" Tony said. "I'll come, but no judging when I order something light." Frankie groaned. "Tony, you're killing me. But fine, just don't embarrass us by ordering a salad at Carlo's." When Tony arrived at the restaurant, the smell of garlic and tomato sauce hit him like a warm embrace. The laughter of old friends echoed through the dimly lit space. He felt like he was home. "Tony!" the guys called out, waving him over. Plates of pasta, bottles of wine, and baskets of bread already crowded the table. "Look at you." Frankie grinned, patting Tony on the back. "You look good. What are you on? The no-joy diet?" Tony smirked. "Nah, just the I want to live past 65 plan." The table roared with laughter, but Tony held firm. When the waiter arrived, Tony surprised everyone, including himself. "I'll have the grilled salmon side of veggies. And a glass of water, please." Frankie nearly choked. "Who are you?" "Just a guy trying not to croak," Tony replied, grinning. But the best part, the food was delicious. Sure, it wasn't lasagna, but the salmon was perfectly cooked, the veggies seasoned just right. By the time Tony left, he didn't feel deprived, he felt proud. The weeks turned into months, and Tony's dedication paid off. His next doctor's visit was something he'd usually dread, but this time he walked in with his head held high. The doctor, a no-nonsense man with glasses perched on his nose, scrolled through Tony's latest test results. "Well," the doctor said, tapping on his tablet. "Your blood sugar levels are down, cholesterol's looking better. You've lost some weight, too." Tony grinned. "So what you're saying is, I'm basically a health guru now." The doctor chuckled. "Let's not get ahead of ourselves, but you're on the right track. Keep it up." Tony nodded, the words sinking in. It wasn't just about avoiding bad news, and it was about taking control. That night, Maria made one of her healthier pasta dishes, whole wheat noodles, light sauce, a sprinkle of cheese. Tony savored every bite, knowing that he wasn't just eating for pleasure, he was eating for life. After dinner, they sat on the porch, the sun dipping low in the sky. Maria leaned her head against Tony's shoulder. "You know," Tony said, "I never thought I'd get to a point where I didn't miss the old days." Maria smiled. "But you didn't lose the old days, Tony. You just made room for new ones." He squeezed her hand. "And I'm not going anywhere." And for once, Tony truly believed it. Months passed, and Tony's new lifestyle became second nature. He still treated himself occasionally, a glass of wine at family dinners, a small slice of cake at birthdays. But the difference was he was in control now. Food didn't own him. He owned his choices. His friends noticed the change too. At their weekly dinners, Tony would still crack jokes and tell stories, but now the laughter came from a man who felt lighter in every sense. Frankie even started asking for Tony's diet tips, though he never gave up Carlo's lasagna. "Balance, Frankie," Tony would say with a smirk. "I'm all about balance now." But the biggest change was how Tony felt at home. Maria, always his biggest supporter, had grown even closer to him during this journey. Their walks became longer, their conversations deeper. She loved the new energy in him, and Tony loved how she never let him forget why he was doing this. For himself, for her, and for the life they'd built together. And when his next birthday rolled around, there was no mountain of desserts, no overflowing glasses of wine. Instead, Maria brought out a small plate with a single slice of sugar-free chocolate cake, topped with a few raspberries. "Make a wish, Tony," she said, her eyes sparkling. He grinned, the candles flickering before him. For the first time, he didn't need to wish for anything more. He had everything he wanted. His health, his family, his happiness. With one big breath, he blew out the candles. Maria clapped. "Happy birthday, Tony." "To many more," he said, pulling her close. And as they laughed and shared the small but satisfying dessert, Tony knew he'd finally found the balance he'd been searching for. Life was sweet, just the right amount of sweet, and that was more than enough.